It's officially July, which means we can officially begin our countdown to camp today. We're talking about the Broncos wide receiver room, maybe the best group of weapons Russell Wilson has ever had in his career. Hello, welcome into the studio. I'm Phil Milani alongside Sidney Jones and Aric DiLalla. Today our question is, who will be the Broncos' top wide receiver this season? Sidney, let's start with you.
Phil, this is a tough question, I think, because I think it's going to be really close between Courtland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy. But I'm going to go with Jerry here. My gut says Jerry because, you look around the league and you see these other receivers. In year 3, they really have that breakout season. I look at Deebo Samuel last year, had a phenomenal season. Look at Cooper Kupp a couple years ago. So I think it is going to be Jerry. He's been itching to get in the end zone, not having a touchdown from last season. And, they talk about so much potential that Jerry had coming into the league. You saw what he did at Alabama. He hasn't had the quarterback to make that happen. Now that he has Russell, I think this is going to be his year.
Jerry Jeudy last year, 38 receptions, 467 yards, 0 touchdowns. A lot of pressure on Jerry. We'll talk about him a little bit more in just a sec, Sid. I want to hear your answer here, Aric.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Courtland, Phil. A few years ago, 2019, when he had that Pro Bowl year, 72 catches, 1,100 yards, 6 touchdowns. And Phil, that was with Joe Flacco, Brandon Allen, and Drew Lock in the first 5 starts of his career. Sidney mentioned Jerry hasn't had that quarterback. Well, Courtland Sutton hasn't really had that elite level quarterback play either. He has that now. He reminds me a lot of a DK Metcalf type player, that big physical body. You can throw the ball down the field to him. He can stiff arm defenders, have that catch and run ability. The one thing Courtland needs to do, though, if he's going to be the top receiver, is kind of avoid those games where he just disappears a little bit. 11 games last year with 3 catches or fewer. He's got to be a more consistent threat. He's got to have 5 or 6 catches every single game. If he does that, I see him going over 1,000 yards again. I see him going back to the Pro Bowl.
Oh, interesting. Sutton only 2 touchdowns last year. Neither of you guys mentioned Tim Patrick, who might have been the Broncos' best wide receiver last year. 734 yards, 5 touchdowns for Patrick last year. Sidney, let's go back to Jerry Jeudy a little bit here. Hearing his name pop up a lot this year. I heard Justin Simmons talk about him a few weeks ago. No touchdowns last season, and you're right, there has been this notion that he hasn't had the quarterback. He's been open, he's the talent, no quarterback for him. Is there pressure on him to succeed this year?
I think there is a lot of pressure on him, and I think Jerry feels that pressure too. I mean, he's talked about it a couple times throughout the offseason so far. He knows that, I think he knows that he has the ability to be a really great receiver in this league, but like you mentioned, like we talked about earlier, he hasn't had the quarterback to make that happen. And I think with Russell here, we're going to see him make that huge jump, and I really hope we do.
Talking about a top wide receiver for Russell Wilson, DK Metcalf last year, 75 receptions, 964 yards, and 12 touchdowns. So if these guys produce, we're going to talk about a substantial jump in numbers for these guys. Aric, how about the back end of this room here? Guys like KJ Hamler, Kendall Hinton, Travis Fulgham. Let's start with Hamler. Is he a candidate to start training camp on the PUP?
Yeah, we'll have to see. I mean, Nathaniel Hackett, if he's done one thing during this offseason, it's hold injuries close to the vest. We don't really have a good idea about where he is, where Billy Turner is, some of these other guys, Randy Gregory. But I do think there's a chance that KJ Hamler's maybe not 100% at training camp. Seemed like he almost did more in May than he did in June for the Broncos. Obviously, he's coming back from not just an ACL, but a hip injury as well. So if he's not ready to go, could see him on PUP for a few weeks, but sooner or later, he's going to be back out there. He's a clear top 4 receiver for the Broncos. I think at the bottom of that group is where it really gets interesting. You obviously draft Montrell Washington. Is he just a return specialist, or can they find a way to use him on offense as well? And then you talk about the rest of those guys, Kendall Hinton, Tyree Cleveland, Travis Fulgham. Those are the guys that are all going to be battling for that 6th receiver spot if the Broncos even keep a 6th receiver. One of those guys is going to have to contribute on special teams if they want to make this team.
Yeah, obviously Tyree Cleveland went down during minicamp. Just an ankle injury, should be ready to go for the start of training camp here. One thing we can expect, though, a lot of those moon balls. Russell Wilson's going to be firing this thing deep, and he's going to need these wide receivers to step up this season. All right, we'll continue our Countdown to Camp series next week, talking about another guy who has a lot of pressure on him, Bradley Chubb. Until then, for Aric DiLalla, Sidney Jones, I'm Phil Milani.